The moment the call came in, everything changed. It wasn't just a phone call. It was the kind that splits your life into before and after. Daniel Reeves stood motionless in the dim light of his apartment, the phone pressed against his ear as a voice trembled on the other end. "Mr. Reeves, your son didn't make it home." The words didn't land all at once. They shattered, slowly, painfully, like glass breaking inside his chest. "What do you mean, didn't make it home?" Daniel asked, his voice low, controlled, but barely. "He left school at the usual time," the voice continued, "but he never arrived." Silence swallowed the room. Daniel's grip tightened around the phone. His breathing slowed, not out of calm, but because his body didn't know how to react yet. This wasn't possible. Not Oliver. Not his son. 10 minutes later, Daniel was already on the road. Streetlights blurred past as his car sped through the city, his mind racing faster than the engine beneath him. Oliver Reeves, 9 years old, quiet, thoughtful, the kind of kid who always followed rules, always checked in, always came home. Always. Daniel replayed the morning in his head. Breakfast, a quick smile, a reminder to finish homework. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. So where did everything break? The school stood eerily quiet when he arrived. Too quiet. Police lights flashed faintly near the entrance, casting red and blue shadows across the empty yard. Daniel didn't wait. He slammed the car door and rushed forward. "Oliver!" he called out instinctively. But the only answer was the hollow echo of his own voice. A woman approached, mid-40s, pale, shaken. "Mr. Reeves?" she asked. He nodded quickly. "Where is he? Who saw him last?" "I'm Principal Lawson," she said gently. "Oliver stayed after class today." "Why?" "He told his teacher someone was coming to get him." Daniel froze. "Someone?" he repeated. She hesitated. "Yes." "Who?" "We don't know." That single sentence twisted something deep inside him. Oliver wasn't careless. He wouldn't leave with a stranger. Which meant he knew them. Inside the classroom, everything looked untouched. Oliver's bag still hung on the side of his chair. His notebook lay open on the desk. Daniel stepped closer, his movements slow now, cautious, like he was afraid reality might snap if he moved too fast. He looked down. A drawing. Crayons scattered around it. The picture showed two figures standing under a dark sky. One was clearly Oliver. The other, tall, shadowed, no face. Just a blank space where features should have been. And above them, written in uneven letters. He said he would come back. Daniel's stomach dropped. A memory, sharp and unwanted, cut through his mind. A voice. A promise. Something he had buried years ago. "No," he whispered. Behind him, a police officer stepped forward. "Sir, we're doing everything we can." Daniel didn't turn around. "When did he leave?" he asked. "We're still reviewing." "When?" Daniel repeated, louder this time. "Around 3:20 p.m. Daniel checked his watch. It had been over 2 hours. 2 hours since his son disappeared. 2 hours where anything could have happened. "Did anyone see who he left with?" Daniel asked. The officer hesitated. "There's partial camera footage," he said. Daniel turned sharply. "Show me." Moments later, they stood in a small security room. A grainy video flickered on the screen. There was Oliver, standing near the school gate. Waiting. Then someone approached. Tall. Wearing a dark coat. face hidden from the camera angle. Oliver didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and took the person's hand. Daniel felt his chest tighten. No fear. No resistance. Just trust. The video froze. "That's all we have," the officer said. But Daniel wasn't listening anymore. Because something about the way Oliver walked, the way he trusted, it wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It was recognition. Daniel stepped back slowly, his mind connecting pieces he had tried to forget. Years ago. A mistake. A person he thought was gone forever. A past he had buried to protect his son. And now, that past had returned. "If I'm right," Daniel murmured, his voice barely audible. The officer frowned. "Right about what?" Daniel looked up. His eyes had changed. Not panic anymore. Not confusion. Something darker. Something certain. "This wasn't a random abduction," he said quietly. "This was planned." Outside, the wind picked up. Clouds gathered, heavy and restless. And somewhere, far from the quiet school, a man watched the same footage on another screen. Smiling. Oliver wasn't lost. He had been taken. And Daniel knew exactly why. Daniel didn't wait for the officers to stop him. By the time they turned around, he was already out of the room, walking fast, too fast, through the empty hallway. "Mr. Reeves," someone called after him. He ignored it. Because something had already clicked into place in his mind. And once it did, there was no turning back. The night air hit his face like a slap as he stepped outside. Cold, sharp, real. Unlike the storm building inside him. Daniel leaned against his car for a moment, his breathing uneven now, not from panic, but from memory. Memories he had locked away. Memories that were never supposed to matter again. 12 years ago. A different city. A different life. And a man named Victor Hale. Daniel closed his eyes tightly. Victor wasn't just someone from his past. He was a mistake. The kind that leaves scars long after it's over. Back then, Daniel hadn't been the man he was now. He wasn't a father. He wasn't careful. He wasn't good. He had worked in private security, high-risk jobs, off-the-record contracts, things that existed in the gray space between legal and necessary. Victor had been his partner. Smart, calm, dangerous in a way that didn't show on the surface. They had trusted each other. Until the night everything went wrong. "It was supposed to be simple," Daniel muttered under his breath, staring at nothing. A routine extraction. A high-profile client. Get in, get out. No complications. But there had been a child. A boy. No older than Oliver. Daniel's chest tightened. The memory hit harder now. They hadn't been told about the child. Hadn't planned for it. And Victor. Victor had made a decision. "Leave him," Victor had said back then, his voice cold, calculated. "He's not part of the job." Daniel had refused. "We're not leaving a kid behind." But Victor didn't argue. He just walked away. That was the last time Daniel saw him. Or so he thought. The mission had collapsed after that. Authorities got involved. The client disappeared. Everything burned down in silence. Daniel walked away from that life. Changed cities. Changed everything. Built something new. Built a life for Oliver. And now, that life was being torn apart. Daniel opened his eyes, his expression hardening. "He came back," he whispered. Not a question. A certainty. Behind him, footsteps approached. "Mr. Reeves," the officer said, slightly out of breath. "You can't just leave like that." Daniel turned slowly. "I know who took my son." The officer blinked. "What?" "His name is Victor Hale," Daniel said. "And if I'm right, you won't find him through normal channels." The officer studied him carefully. "And why is that?" Daniel stepped closer. Because he knew how this sounded. Crazy. Desperate. But none of that mattered. "Because Victor doesn't exist anymore," Daniel said quietly. "At least, not on paper." Silence hung between them. Then the officer sighed. "Look, I understand you're under stress, but—" "You saw the footage," Daniel cut in. "My son walked with him willingly." "That doesn't prove." "It proves Oliver knew him." The officer hesitated. "Because that part was true." "And if Oliver recognized him," Daniel continued, "then Victor has been watching us for a long time." A cold realization settled in. Not just for Daniel, but for the officer too. "You're saying this was planned," the officer said slowly. Daniel nodded. "Yes." "Why take your son?" That question lingered. Heavy. Unanswered. Daniel looked away. Because deep down, he already knew. "Because of me," he said finally. The officer frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "Victor doesn't do anything without a reason," he said. "And if he took Oliver—" His voice tightened. "It's not about the child." A pause. "It's about sending a message." The wind picked up again, rustling the trees nearby. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. "Then we need to move fast," the officer said. "If this man is as dangerous as you say—" "He is," Daniel interrupted. A beat of silence. "And you won't find him," Daniel added. The officer's patience thinned. "We have resources." "And he knows how to avoid them," Daniel said firmly. "Because I taught him." That changed everything. The officer studied Daniel again. This time, differently. "Then help us," he said. "Tell us where to start." Daniel hesitated. Not because he didn't want to, but because he knew what that meant. Going back. To the life he left behind. To the man he used to be. Because finding Victor meant becoming someone else again. Daniel looked at the school building one last time. Empty. Silent. 2 hours, he murmured. What? That's how long he's had, Daniel said. Victor doesn't waste time. By now, he's already set the stage. For what? The officer asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. For me, he said. And in that moment, it became clear. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a game. A calculated personal game. And Daniel had just been invited to play. Far away, in a dimly lit room, Oliver sat quietly on a chair. Not crying. Not struggling. Just waiting. Across from him, a man stood in the shadows. Watching. You look just like him, the man said softly. Oliver tilted his head. Do I know you? He asked. The man smiled faintly. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. No, he said. A pause. But your father does. The room smelled faintly of dust and something metallic. Oliver sat still, his small hands resting on his knees, his eyes quietly observing everything around him. The walls were bare, gray, and cold, like the place had been forgotten long ago. But he wasn't afraid. Not yet. The man across from him stepped slightly forward, just enough for the dim light to brush against his face. Sharp features, calm expression, eyes that didn't blink often enough. "Are you hungry?" the man asked. Oliver shook his head. A lie. But he didn't feel safe enough to say the truth. The man noticed. Of course he did. But he didn't push. "That's all right," he said softly. "We have time." Time. The word echoed strangely in the room. Oliver glanced toward the only door. Locked. No windows. No sound from outside. "Where am I?" Oliver asked after a moment. The man smiled faintly. "A place where your father will come looking for you." That answer didn't help. But it told Oliver something important. This wasn't random. "Why?" Oliver asked. The man tilted his head slightly, studying him. "You ask a lot of questions," he said. "My dad says questions help you understand things," Oliver replied. For a brief moment, something flickered in the man's expression. Not anger. Not annoyance. Something else. "Your father says a lot of things," the man said quietly. A pause. Then he stepped closer. Slow. Controlled. "Tell me," he continued, "what does he say about the past?" Oliver frowned. "The past?" "Yes," the man said. "The things that happened before you were born." Oliver shook his head. "He doesn't talk about that." The man's smile returned. This time, sharper. "I know," he said. Silence filled the room again. But this time, it felt heavier. Miles away, Daniel was already moving. His apartment looked untouched. Clean. Orderly. Normal. But Daniel wasn't looking for normal. He was looking for something he hoped he'd never need again. He moved quickly to the back of his closet, pushing aside neatly arranged clothes until his hand reached the hidden panel behind them. For a second, he hesitated. Because opening it meant something. It meant going back. But then, Oliver's face flashed in his mind. And the hesitation vanished. Daniel pulled the panel open. Inside, a locked metal case. Dust-covered. Forgotten. But not gone. He took it out slowly, placing it on the table. His reflection stared back at him from the dull surface. Older now. Tired. But underneath, still the same man. The lock clicked open. Inside, a gun, a worn leather folder, and a small device, black and compact. Daniel stared at them for a long moment, then reached for the folder. Inside were names, locations, old reports, everything he had tried to erase. Until he found it. Victor Hale. No address. No official records. Just fragments. And one photograph. Daniel picked it up. His grip tightened instantly. Victor stood in the image, expression unreadable, eyes fixed directly on the camera. Even then, there had been something wrong about him. Something distant. "You should have stayed gone," Daniel muttered. But deep down, he knew this wasn't sudden. Victor had planned this. For years, maybe. Daniel grabbed the small device next. A tracker. Old technology, but reliable. Untraceable by standard systems. If Victor was using anything from their past, this might be the only way to find him. Daniel slipped the gun into his jacket, took the tracker, closed the case. And just like that, the man he used to be stepped forward again. Back in the room. Oliver shifted slightly in his seat. "Are you going to hurt me?" he asked quietly. The man stopped pacing. Turned slowly. "Hurt you?" he repeated. A strange calm settled over his face. "No," he said. A pause. "You're not the one who needs to be hurt." Oliver didn't fully understand, but he felt it. This wasn't about him. "Then why am I here?" he asked. The man walked closer again. Closer than before. "Because," he said softly, "you are the only way to make your father understand." "Understand what?" The man leaned down slightly. Now they were face to face. "That some debts," he whispered, "don't disappear." Daniel's car came to a sudden stop outside an old industrial district. Dark. Quiet. Abandoned. The kind of place that didn't ask questions. He stepped out slowly, scanning the area. Every instinct he had was awake now. Sharp. Focused. Victor always liked isolation. Control. Environments where he held every advantage. And this felt exactly like him. Daniel turned on the tracker. The screen flickered. Static. Then a signal. Weak. But there. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Got you." But as he stepped forward, something didn't feel right. Too easy. And Victor was never easy. Somewhere in the shadows, a camera blinked. Watching. Recording. And on a screen nearby, Victor stood silently, observing. "Come on, Daniel," he murmured, a faint smile forming. "Let's see if you've learned anything." The silence in the industrial district wasn't natural. It pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating, broken only by the faint crunch of gravel beneath Daniel's boots as he moved forward. Every step felt watched. Measured. Expected. Daniel slowed. His eyes scanned every corner, the rooftops, broken windows, rusted staircases hanging off the sides of abandoned buildings. Nothing moved. But that didn't mean nothing was there. The tracker in his hand flickered again. The signal grew slightly stronger. Straight ahead. One of the warehouses. Of course. Daniel exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "This is exactly what you want," he muttered. A controlled space. Limited exits. No witnesses. Victor hadn't just taken Oliver. He had built a stage. Daniel approached the warehouse door. Half open. Like an invitation. Or a warning. He pushed it gently. The hinges creaked loudly, the sound echoing deep into the darkness inside. No turning back now. Inside. Dim light filtered through broken panels in the ceiling. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by the slightest movement. The space was large, empty. Too empty. Daniel stepped in cautiously, his senses stretched to their limits. "Victor!" he called out. His voice echoed back at him. Alone. No answer. Of course not. Daniel moved deeper inside. Each step slower now. More deliberate. Then, a sound. A faint click. Daniel froze. Too late. A sharp mechanical snap echoed from behind him. The door slammed shut. Darkness shifted. Lights flickered on, one by one, casting long, harsh shadows across the warehouse floor. Daniel turned sharply. And that's when he saw it. A chair. In the center of the room. Empty. But above it, a screen. It flickered to life. And suddenly, Oliver's face appeared. "Dad?" Daniel's heart stopped. "Oliver," he rushed forward instinctively. But the image didn't respond. Didn't move closer. It was a recording. Daniel clenched his fists. "Where is he?" he shouted into the empty space. A slow clap echoed from the shadows. Once. Twice. Then a voice. Calm. Familiar. "You're right on time." Daniel turned. And there he was. Victor Hale stepped out of the darkness like he had never left it. Unchanged. Or maybe just untouched by time. Same calm expression. Same unreadable eyes. "You shouldn't have come back," Daniel said, his voice low, filled with restrained anger. Victor tilted his head slightly. "And miss this?" he said. "I think not." They stood there, facing each other. Years of silence between them. Unspoken things. Unfinished business. "Where's my son?" Daniel demanded. Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly across the room. Circling. Studying. "You built a quiet life," Victor said. "A child. A routine. Almost convincing." Daniel's jaw tightened. "This isn't about me." Victor stopped. Looked directly at him. "No," he said softly. "It's exactly about you." A pause. "You disappeared," Victor continued. "Walked away like nothing happened. Because it was over." Victor's smile faded. "No," he said. "It wasn't." The air shifted. Heavier now. Sharper. "You left something unfinished," Victor added. Daniel's voice hardened. "We made choices. We both walked away." Victor's eyes darkened. "No," he repeated. "You walked away." Silence. And then, Victor stepped closer. "What do you think happened after you left, Daniel?" he asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer. But his mind already knew. This wasn't just revenge. This was something deeper. "You saved that child," Victor continued. "Do you remember?" The memory hit again. Clearer now. Sharper. "Yes," Daniel said. "And you left me behind," Victor said. "That wasn't." "It was exactly that," Victor cut in. His voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. "Everything fell apart after that," he continued. "The job, the network, the consequences." Daniel shook his head. "You chose your path." Victor smiled faintly. "And now," he said, "you get to see where it leads." Daniel took a step forward. "Dangerous now." "Enough," he said. "Where is Oliver?" Victor studied him for a long moment. Then, he reached into his coat. Daniel tensed instantly. But Victor didn't pull a weapon. He pulled out a small device. Pressed a button. The screen above flickered again. This time, it wasn't a recording. Oliver appeared again. Live. "Dad," Oliver said, his voice small but steady. Daniel's breath caught. "Oliver, I'm here." "Good," Victor said quietly. Daniel's eyes snapped back to him. Because now, Victor continued, we can begin. A low hum filled the room. Something mechanical. Hidden. Daniel's instincts screamed. This isn't just about taking him, Daniel said. You want something. Victor smiled. Of course I do. A pause. I want you to understand. Understand what? Daniel snapped. Victor stepped closer. Now only a few feet away. What it feels like, he said softly. To lose control. Suddenly, a loud metallic clang echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. Oliver's image flickered. Daniel turned back to the screen. Oliver? Static. Then, darkness. No, Daniel whispered. Victor watched him carefully. This is only the beginning, he said. Daniel turned back slowly, his eyes burning now. If you hurt him. Victor shook his head. You still don't get it, he said. A faint smile returned. This isn't about hurting him. A pause. It's about breaking you. Somewhere far beneath the warehouse. In a locked room. Oliver sat alone again. But this time, the lights above him flickered. And the walls moved. Just slightly. Like something behind them was waking up. Oliver looked around, his calm finally beginning to crack. Dad, he whispered. But there was no answer. Only the sound of something shifting in the dark. Daniel didn't think. He moved. The moment the screen went dark, something inside him snapped into focus, sharp, instinctive, unstoppable. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was survival. Where is he? Daniel demanded again, stepping forward. Victor didn't move. Didn't flinch. You're asking the wrong question, he said calmly. Daniel's patience shattered. He grabbed Victor by the collar and slammed him against the nearest pillar. Where is my son? For a brief second, Victor's expression shifted. Not fear. Not pain. Satisfaction. Now there you are, Victor whispered. Daniel froze. Just for a moment. And that moment was enough. A loud metallic sound echoed beneath their feet. Daniel stepped back instinctively. The ground vibrated. What did you do? He asked, his voice tightening. Victor straightened his coat slowly. Calm as ever. I told you, he said. This is a game. The lights flickered again. Then stabilized. A new sound filled the space. Not loud, but constant. Tick. 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 Daniel's eyes widened slightly. No, he muttered. Victor smiled. Now you're starting to understand. Far below. Oliver stood up. The room was no longer still. The walls, once silent, were shifting. Closing in. Slowly. Almost unnoticeable. But enough. Oliver placed his hand against one wall. It moved. Not fast, but steady. His breathing quickened. Hey, he called out. Hello? No response. Only the sound. Tick. 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 Back in the warehouse. Daniel turned sharply, scanning the floor, the structure, the layout. Where is he? He shouted. Victor walked toward the center of the room. Unbothered. You always were fast, he said, but not fast enough. Daniel's fists clenched. If anything happens to him... Victor interrupted again. Something is happening to him. That landed hard. Daniel stepped forward again. But slower this time. More controlled. Tell me the rules, he said. Victor stopped. Smiled. There it is, he said softly. The man I remember. A pause. The rules are simple, Victor continued. You have limited time. The ticking grew louder. And, Daniel asked. And every decision you make, Victor said, brings you closer or further away from him. Daniel's mind raced. This place, it's a setup, he said. Multiple sections. Traps. Victor said nothing. But his silence confirmed everything. Daniel looked around again. Faster now. Calculating. Where is the entrance to the lower level? He asked. Victor tilted his head. But that's not the only path. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Victor stepped closer again. It means, he said quietly, you can't save him and stay clean. Silence. The meaning sank in. Daniel's voice dropped. What did you set up? Victor leaned in slightly. A choice. Below. Oliver stepped back as the walls closed in further. The space was smaller now. Noticeably smaller. His breathing grew faster. But he tried to stay calm. Think, he whispered to himself. My dad says, don't panic. He looked around. Searching. Observing. There. A small panel. Near the floor. Oliver rushed to it, kneeling down. Trying to pry it open. It didn't budge. Come on, he muttered. The ticking grew louder. Tick. Tick. Above. Daniel's eyes moved rapidly across the room. There's more than one way down, he said. Victor smiled faintly. Yes. But only one gets you there in time. Daniel looked at him sharply. And the other? Victor's smile widened. Costs you something. Daniel understood immediately. Two paths. One fast. One safe. But not both. Show me, Daniel said. Victor gestured toward two directions. One. A narrow staircase, partially collapsed, leading downward into darkness. Unstable. Risky. The other. A solid metal door. Locked. Electronic panel beside it. Daniel stepped closer to the panel. What's the catch? He asked. Victor folded his arms. The door opens easily, he said. Daniel didn't trust that. And? Victor's eyes locked onto his. It triggers a delay. Daniel's chest tightened. How long? Victor didn't answer immediately. Then. Long enough. Below. Oliver's fingers slipped against the panel. He hit it harder this time. Nothing. The walls moved closer. The space tightened. Dad, he whispered, his voice finally shaking. Above. Daniel looked between the staircase and the door. Time. Risk. Consequence. Everything came down to this. Victor watched him carefully. This is what you do, Daniel, he said softly. You choose. Daniel closed his eyes. Just for a second. Then opened them. Decision made. He turned. and ran toward the darkness. Victor's smile faded slightly. "Still the same," he murmured. But there was something else now. Something uncertain. Daniel disappeared into the unstable stairway, the structure creaking beneath his weight as he rushed down. Each step felt like it might collapse. But he didn't slow. He couldn't. Because somewhere below, his son was running out of time. And the ticking was getting faster. The staircase groaned beneath Daniel's weight. Each step cracked, splintered, threatening to collapse into darkness below, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. The ticking was louder now. Faster. Tick. 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 Daniel reached the bottom and pushed through a rusted metal door, forcing it open with all his strength. What he saw made his heart stop. The room was smaller than he expected. Concrete walls. No windows. Dim flickering light. And in the center, Oliver. Trapped inside a narrowing space, the walls closing in from both sides. "Dad!" Oliver shouted, relief and fear colliding in his voice. "I'm here!" Daniel rushed forward. The gap between the walls was already tight. Too tight. Daniel dropped to his knees, trying to force his hands between the moving panels. They didn't stop. Didn't even slow. "Step back," Daniel said quickly. Oliver moved as far as he could. But there wasn't much space left. Daniel scanned the mechanism. No obvious controls. No visible override. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. Victor never built something without a control point. Then he saw it. A small slot in the wall. Almost hidden. Daniel reached into it. His fingers brushed against something sharp. Metal. He pulled it out. A key. But attached to it, a thin wire. Daniel froze. A trap. Of course. The moment he removed it, the system would react. He looked back at Oliver. His son's breathing was fast now. Panic creeping in. "Dad, I can't move." The walls pressed closer. Daniel's mind raced. Victor's voice echoed in his memory. "You can't save him and stay clean." This was it. The choice. Daniel looked at the wire again. If he pulled the key, it might stop the walls. Or speed them up. No way to know. No safe option. Above, Victor stood silently, watching through the screen. His expression unreadable. But his eyes, focused. Waiting. Below. Daniel made his decision. He looked at Oliver. Softened his voice. "Hey, look at me." Oliver did. Barely holding it together now. "You trust me?" Daniel asked. A small nod. Always. That word hit deeper than anything else. Daniel swallowed hard. Then he pulled the key. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the walls stopped. Completely. Silence. The ticking. Gone. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Come here," he said quickly, pulling Oliver out of the narrowing space and into his arms. Oliver clung to him tightly. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Holding him. Feeling him. Alive. But then, a sound. Slow. Deliberate. Clapping. Daniel turned. Victor stood in the doorway, watching them. Impressive, he said. Daniel stood up slowly, keeping Oliver behind him. It's over, Daniel said. Victor shook his head. No, he said softly. A pause. Now it's over. Something in his tone shifted. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Something final. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What did you do? He asked. Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Oliver, then back at Daniel. You made the same choice, he said quietly. Daniel frowned. What? Victor stepped closer. You chose the child, he said. A pause. Just like before. The memory hit again. That night. That boy. Daniel's grip tightened. And I'd do it again, he said firmly. Victor nodded slowly. I know. Silence. Then, Victor reached into his coat. Daniel tensed. But this time, he didn't stop him. Victor pulled out something small. A photograph. He held it out. Daniel hesitated, then took it. His breath caught. It was the boy. From years ago. Smiling. Alive. What is this? Daniel asked. Victor's voice was quiet now. You thought I left him, he said. Daniel looked up. Confused. I didn't. Everything stopped. What? Daniel said. Victor exhaled slowly. I went back, he said. A pause. After you left. Daniel's mind struggled to catch up. You saved him? Victor nodded. But it cost everything. Silence filled the room. The job, the network, my life, Victor continued. Gone. Daniel stared at him. Then why? He asked. Victor looked at Oliver again. Then back at Daniel. Because you never knew, he said. A pause. You walked away thinking I chose wrong. Daniel didn't speak. Because it was true. I needed you to understand, Victor said. His voice wasn't cold anymore. Just tired. That we both made the same choice. The weight of it settled. Years of anger. Of assumptions. Of silence. All built on something incomplete. Daniel looked down at the photo again. Then at Oliver. Then back at Victor. You could have just told me, he said quietly. Victor gave a faint, almost broken smile. Would you have listened? Daniel didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Getting closer. Time was up. Victor stepped back slowly. It doesn't matter now, he said. Daniel stepped forward. Victor. But it was too late. Victor turned and disappeared into the shadows. Gone. Moments later, police flooded the building. Lights. Voices. Chaos. But Daniel didn't move. He just stood there, holding Oliver. Breathing. Alive. Outside. The sky had cleared. The storm was gone. Days later, Daniel sat quietly in his apartment. Oliver asleep on the couch beside him. Safe. Daniel looked at the photograph again. then placed it gently on the table. Not hidden. Not forgotten. This time. Remembered. Because some truths don't come easy. Some choices don't come clean. But in the end, the only thing that matters is who you choose to save and what you're willing to become to do it.